Marcy, Skylight, Gray, Cliff, and Redfield done. Now the long walk back to the lodge. 3:55 a.m., just signed in. Santanoni Range, let's go. The wind is whipping here in the Seward Range today. Just finished the Macomb slide and my legs are on fire. Well, I fell victim to the floating logs again. Made it to the top of East Dix. Peak number 3 of 5 for today here in the Dix Range. Avalanche Pass. On top of Rocky Peak Ridge. It's like a hurricane up here. Rain and wind here on Tabletop. Whiteface, number 6. Muddy day here on Street and Nye for number 7 and 8. Sunny and blue on Haystack. Algonquin, up in the clouds, number 18. Gothics, number 22. Panther, number 38. Allen, number 45. 7:12 a.m. Big Slide, Adirondack, 46er. You're listening to the 46 of 46 podcast. August 5th, 2018. It was a Sunday morning and my final day home before going back to work. This epic month of hiking was over, but my 46er journey was still very much underway. Less than 36 hours after finishing Colden and Marshall, I was in my car driving to the Garden Trailhead in Keene Valley to squeeze in one last hike before leaving home for a while. Haystack, Basin, and Saddleback. Arguably the most epic hikes of all the high peaks. A real crowd favorite, and we had another perfect sunny Bluebird Adirondack day. Knowing I had to drive to New York City this afternoon, Josh obliged me and the 4:30 a.m. crew got an even earlier start than usual. We drove separate cars and left my house in Saranac Lake at 3 a.m. and headed to Keene Valley. Knowing how busy the garden parking lot is, we decided to park one of our cars at the Rooster Comb parking, then hop in the other car and drive up to the garden. We got to Rooster Comb and it was packed, leaving me pretty worried the garden would be even worse. So I parked my van and hopped in Josh's truck and we headed up to the garden, snagging the only remaining parking spot. Thank God we got one. Man, we were lucky. So the hike was on. It was very dark and very quiet as you'd imagine at the garden at this hour. So we clicked on our headlamps and signed in at 3:45 a.m. Of course, the first people of the day. Then as we took no more than 3 steps onto the trail into the woods, we both heard something very large up in front of us move through the woods, and it stopped Josh and I dead in our tracks. "Hello?" I called out into the dead silence. Whatever moved wasn't moving and had clearly stopped. "What was that?" I then whispered to Josh. We both gave each other a confused look, and since neither of us wanted to be the wimp, we just shook it off and started walking down the trail. We moved pretty quickly past this first section of trail, though I will admit. So our plan for the day was to walk into Johnsbrook Lodge, head towards Marcy, and eventually summit Haystack first, which is 9 miles alone from the garden. Then we would continue the loop from there over to Basin, then Saddleback, then back to Johnsbrook Lodge, and back to the parking lot. The day would be around 18.5 miles with just over 5,000 feet of elevation gain. Another good-sized day, though after my day on Marcy, Skylight, Gray, Cliff, and Redfield, anything under 20 miles seems like child's play. But it's still a big day. So we continued our walk to Johnsbrook Lodge, which is around 3.5 miles, winding through the woods. A nice way to start a hike and get warmed up for the day, but still a little long at the same time. If you're not familiar with Johnsbrook Lodge, it's a great lodge and campsites people can rent out. Definitely look it up, as it can make some of your hikes much shorter on the day, and it's just a great spot all around. We didn't hear any more large noises in the woods, fortunately. Well, not until the very next time we came to the garden, but that's for a future episode. But we finally made it to JBL and crossed over the brook via a great wooden bridge just as the sun was beginning to rise. I'd only been to JBL once in my life, and that was on a 6th grade field trip where we came here for a night. And when you're in 6th grade and going on an overnight school trip, boys and girls, you feel so cool. This girl likes him, but does he like her? Oh, he likes her, though. Classic middle school life, am I right? Those were the days. And one of the classes' trip was actually cut short when a student threatened some other kid with a knife and then pulled out said knife. So that was a classic 6th grade moment here at JBL. One of my main memories of 6th grade. So after arriving, we walked around and checked it out for a minute and then followed the signs towards Marcy. Fortunately, Josh was here and had done this. Otherwise, I would have probably fallen victim to the confusing signage up here. The same way our French-Canadian friend we would pass on Basin did. So take note, at the lodge there's a sign pointing you left and tells you how far Haystack is, making it seem like that is the way to Haystack. And if someone's brain is on autopilot, it would be very easy to go that way accidentally, which is what happened to our French-Canadian friend. That direction is pointing you to Haystack with the correct mileage, yes, I believe it was over 7 miles or something like that, but I don't remember exactly what it is right now. So while it's close, it does seem a little more than expected, which could raise one red flag in your mind. But that's because that gets you to Haystack by going up and over Saddleback and Basin first. So if you're planning to do the loop that direction, have at it. But today we wanted to start on Haystack. I definitely would have gone the wrong way if it wasn't for Josh already knowing about this slightly confusing sign. Well, yes, it's an accurate sign, though I do feel it's a little misleading, and I feel it could be easily fixed to be more accommodating for hikers, and much safer, too, when considering someone who's not planning on it now having to go down the Saddleback cliffs as opposed to up. But we went towards Mount Marcy from the lodge and continued along the brook for a while as we gradually began climbing up to Haystack. The sun was out now, so we put our headlamps away, blue skies above us. This trail is quite long and kind of feels like you're never going to get there when you know it's 9 miles from the start to the summit. But we kept plugging away along the trail, walking through the woods, some climbing, a little mud, pretty typical Adirondack hiking, very green all around us. We eventually came to Slant Rock, as it's called, which is literally an enormous slanted rock. It's pretty cool. It was here we grabbed a gulp of some Noon tablet water, and up until this point I actually wasn't feeling great on the day. Ever since I woke up this morning I just felt off and couldn't quite shake it or understand why. However, once we got to Slant Rock, I decided to fuel up and got into one of my share-size bags of peanut M&Ms. I did not share them with Josh, however. I ate the entire bag. But no joke, from that point, that off feeling I felt was gone, and I finally felt great. It was like I shook something off and felt awesome. The M&Ms to the rescue. Can I get an amen? So we carried on up the Phelps Trail, where we came to what I'm told is a shortcut trail of sorts. Josh took it the first time he and his wife hiked this trail and said it's super steep and he didn't want to take it today. So we stayed on the Phelps Trail until we finally came to the next junction where we could go left to Haystack or continue on the Phelps Trail to Marcy. So which way did we go, you ask? Well, you guessed it, left it was. Good guess. This is another gradual climb up for about a half mile or so until meeting up with the State Range Trail, which we'll take later in the day to go to Basin. But once at this junction, we went right to Haystack, and you very quickly come out onto the summit of Little Haystack, where you get an incredible glimpse of Haystack in front of you. A massive mountain indeed. And now that we could see the summit, that 9-mile journey didn't seem so bad. So we went up and over Little Haystack towards Big Daddy Haystack, which the final climb is pretty much all above the tree line, so it's a long, fun scramble following cairns and paint markers. Always a fun way to end in another one of those mountains where it feels like you're in a different country, like something from Lord of the Rings or The Princess Bride.
Inconceivable!
The final hike from Little Haystack to the summit is not long, maybe 10, 20 minutes at most, somewhere in that range. But we booked it to the top and we were finally there, 9 miles down. Summit number 35, Haystack, the third tallest high peak at 4,960 feet. It was 8:30 a.m. when we made it to the top, clocking our trip up Haystack at 4 hours and 45 minutes from signing in. A long time to get to the first peak of the day. And now time to eat a delicious turkey sandwich. Today I decided to treat myself on each summit, and instead of my usual PB&Js, I brought a turkey and provolone sandwich to eat on each summit. My fuel level was going to be very good today. My taste buds would thank me. Haystack has a huge rocky summit and lots of space with absolutely massive views all around, especially on this clear summer day. The summit had 2 or 3 groups of people on it when we arrived, and they were the first people we saw on the day. We had some conversations with some of them up there. One group of guys, Josh and I refer to them as the Sheilas, were camping and had all their gear with them, bear canisters and all. And they were planning to hike the entire Great Range today. And after asking them what time they summited, they told us they had been up there for a few hours just hanging out. So upon hearing that, Josh and I had the same thought as we looked at each other. Well, you guys better get moving then. They said they were going to stay up there for another hour or so and then continue on. So something tells me they probably didn't finish the entire Great Range today based on our conversation and the pace they seemed to be hiking at, but who knows, maybe they did, what do I know? But I doubt it. After hanging out for 20 minutes or so, we kept on moving. Back down to Little Haystack, up and over and back to the State Range Trail junction we passed earlier towards Basin. Getting to the col between Haystack and Basin wasn't too bad. It was a lot of rock hopping and a nice gradual descent. Nothing like what going down the next mountain would be. So we made it to the col and immediately began the ascent to Basin. Around halfway up, there's a nice rock climb. Grab some roots and climb up the slab, that sort of thing. And upon getting to the top of it, we heard the strangest accent yelling to us from up the trail. It was a very nice French-Canadian man who was all too excited to see us and chat. He was solo, and as a solo hiker most of the time myself, I can absolutely relate to the moment you finally pass someone for the day and you're so excited. Human interaction can be so nice when you're spending so many hours on the trail solo with no one to talk to but your own mind. The man had a very unique accent, one we had not heard before despite meeting French Canadians often, and we really had to listen carefully and really dissect and piece together his sentences. Turns out he went left towards Haystack back at JBL and fell victim to the confusing and semi-misleading, though still accurate, signage down there that I mentioned earlier. He was unintentionally doing the loop backwards than how we were. He meant to go the same way we did. Anyways, we chatted for a minute and he told us to be very careful going down Basin, which was my first hint that it was going to be brutal. So we carried on up Basin and we made it to the summit an hour after leaving Haystack at 10:15 a.m. Number 36, standing 4,827 feet. 36, just 10 more mountains to go to 46. This was the first time where I could really start to see the finish line in the distance. Very fun feeling. Basin has a smaller rocky summit, but still enormous views and a great place to sit and hang out for a while. So we did exactly that. We sat down, and since we had the summit to ourselves, we took it all in and hung out for a good 20 minutes or so before our must always be moving, must keep moving thought processes came back to our mind. After eating a sandwich, of course. So now it was time to head to Saddleback. The descent off of Basin, in my opinion, was the most physically challenging part of the day. The entire descent from the summit to the col is a very technical one, the type of trail where you're having to calculate every single step. Grabbing roots, stepping down to that rock, then over to that branch, then I'm going to hold on to this tree at this point, I'm going to swing down to that rock for pretty much the entire trip. It's fun, but it's a little slow going. At least it was for us. A few slips on some still wet, muddy slabs, but nothing serious, thankfully. Once we made it to the col, I was thrilled because the knees were pounding, and my brain also needed a break from that descent. It's a memorable one, I'll say that. Once in the col, you're not far from the summit, as this portion of the hike the majority of mileage and time is spent descending Basin. But shortly after, it was time to climb the infamous cliffs of Saddleback.
The cliffs of insanity!
This is very literally a rock climb. You don't need harnesses and rock climbing gear, though some days I imagine you definitely do, and some people might prefer having that. Such as Josh's wife when they hiked this. She had a fear of heights and a fear of falling, so Josh, being a rock climber himself, brought gear to harness her in while she climbed this portion of the trail to feel safe. So be mindful if that sounds like something that may be tough for you. It's an actual rock climb. Not an insane rock climb, but I mean it's an actual rock climb. I'm just going to say that. With that said, people do it every day, and I did it. And while I'm strong, I'm also a bigger guy, and there's definitely a reason rock climbers are small and slender. Let's put it that way. I remember two moves while climbing up these cliffs where I got a bit nervous. One was moving my hands from one rock to the other, and the other was one maneuver involving stepping up onto another rock and then moving my body and grabbing the rock above. It was a bit nerve-wracking. But once up the cliffs, you made it. You're at the summit. Big, massive views again. A similar size summit as Basin. Great rocks to sit on and take in the views of the mountains you just came from. This hike also took an hour from leaving Basin, and it was now 11:25 a.m. for number 37, Saddleback, 4,515 feet. So we summited all three peaks before noon once again. Awesome. Always a great accomplishment to be standing on the final peak before noon, in my opinion. I will say going down the Saddleback cliffs must be really difficult, and there's obviously a way to do it, but I would definitely recommend doing this loop the way we did, starting with Haystack for this specific reason of going up them rather than down. We had the summit to ourselves again, but now that we finished each peak and knowing the day and drive that was still ahead of me, we started the long hike out pretty quickly. I don't usually talk about enjoyable descents because the descents usually destroy my body and my soul, but I will make a sweeping declaration right now, and I'll say the descent off of Saddleback was my favorite of any high peak. It was a delight. Why, you might be wondering? Oh, I thought you'd never ask. This descent has so many different sections of terrain and keeps changing, making it very interesting both visually and physically while hiking. It has climbing down slabs by the roots, then quickly you're in a new section of woods trail, then boom, you're in some rock hopping for a while, then you're walking down an enormous wooden staircase with probably over 100 steps down the side of a slide. It just ruled, quite honestly. Props to the trail crew who built the longest wooden staircase I've ever seen. Great work. At one point while Josh and I were walking down this staircase, there was a group coming up, and well before we got to passing each other, one of the guys coming up very quickly in a very dramatic, overacting fashion jumped off the stairs and acted like he was holding on for dear life and couldn't believe that he had to pass us on the stairs. He was going up and we were going down.